police called to say my son was arrested for destroying the community pool and causing $40,000 in damages, but he said he had to empty it because someone was deliberately poisoning the kids during free swim hours. What's the weirdest call you've gotten from the police? The call came while I was reviewing reports in my office on the hottest day of the year. Officer Turner sounded exhausted when he said, "Your son has been arrested for destruction of public property, and he's caused over $40,000 in damages." This was the same Officer Turner who'd coached my son's little league team just 3 years ago, and hearing the disappointment in his tone made my stomach drop. He explained that my 17-year-old had broken into the community pool at 3 in the morning and opened every drainage valve and service port, completely emptying all 4 pools and causing significant damage to the pump systems. The morning swim classes for toddlers had to be canceled, and hundreds of families with pool memberships were demanding refunds because the pools would be closed for at least 2 weeks during the worst heat wave our town had seen in a decade. I left work immediately and drove to the police station, my mind racing through possible explanations because this wasn't like him at all. My son was the kid who stayed after school to tutor struggling students and spent weekends volunteering at the animal shelter, not someone who would randomly vandalize the place where he worked as a lifeguard. When I found him in the holding area, he was still wearing his soaking wet clothes from the night before, and his hands were raw and bleeding from wrestling with the rusted valve handles. The desk sergeant informed me that they were considering charging him as an adult because of the extent of the damage and the clear premeditation involved in bringing tools to break the locks. "You need to let me explain what's been happening at that pool," my son said as soon as we were alone in the interview room. He pulled out his phone and showed me dozens of photos he'd been taking over the past 3 weeks of children with angry red burns across their backs and shoulders and strange rashes spreading up their arms. These kids had been coming to the free swim hours that the city offers to low-income families every morning from 6 to 8, and their parents couldn't afford to take them to private pools or beaches. The burns were getting worse every day, but the pool manager kept insisting the chemical levels were perfectly safe and threatened to ban anyone who complained. My son had stolen water testing strips from the supply closet and discovered chlorine levels nearly 4 times the legal limit, plus ammonia readings that shouldn't exist in a properly maintained pool. "I reported it to the health department 5 different times, and they said they'd send someone next month," he explained while showing me screenshots of his emails and their automated responses. The richer families who swim in the evenings weren't getting hurt because the pool staff would dilute the chemicals after the morning sessions, but those kids who could only come during the free hours were basically swimming in poison. He'd watched a 4-year-old girl named Gracie leave practice crying because the water made her skin burn so badly she couldn't practice her backstroke anymore, and her mom had to choose between swim lessons and groceries, so she couldn't afford a doctor visit to get documentation of the injuries. The police brought in the pool manager, who immediately started yelling about prosecuting to the fullest extent and making sure my son would have a criminal record that would follow him forever. But then parents started showing up at the station with their children, and the evidence was undeniable because you could see the chemical burns clearly patterned across their small bodies. One mother was sobbing as she explained how her daughter had been vomiting after every swim lesson, but she thought it was just nerves about learning to swim. Another father showed photos of his twin boys who had matching rashes that doctors couldn't explain until they realized it only appeared where their swimsuits didn't cover. The pool manager kept insisting his chemical logs showed everything was within normal ranges, but more and more families kept arriving with horror stories and medical bills. Those children were being poisoned, and everyone who was supposed to protect them failed, my son said loud enough for everyone in the station to hear. The desk sergeant was taking photos of the children's injuries and calling his supervisor because this was becoming something bigger than simple vandalism. The pool manager tried to leave, but Officer Turner told him to stay because investigators would need to examine those chemical logs he'd mentioned. Parents were thanking my son and hugging him, saying he'd saved their children from permanent scarring or worse. The father with the twins shook my hand and said,